Good afternoon and welcome everyone to Hanapin Marketing's webinar. Today we are going to be discussing questions you should ask your account manager. So presenting today is going to be myself. This is Kayla Kurtz, by the way. I'm the Senior Digital Advisor at Hanapin Marketing. You can tweet at me at 1-800-KAYLA. I also have Jeff Allen, the president here at Hanapin Marketing, and you can reach Jeff at JeffAllenUT. Jeff, say hello.
Hello.
Jeff and I have done this quite a few times together, so this is probably going to be way more of a conversation than a webinar. Hopefully you guys are excited about that. Speaking of the conversation, we really want to make sure you guys are interacting with us. So if you have questions throughout the presentation today, feel free to tweet those at us and include the hashtag ThinkPPC in those tweets, and we'll answer them at the end. You can, of course, also use the webinar question box over to the side, and we will check those for questions at the end as well. All right, so let's get things started with a poll question. We want to know how long our attendees on today's presentation have been in PPC. So your options are less than 1 year, 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, and 5+ years. Jeff, why don't you share with us how much experience you've got in paid search?
I have infinity experience in paid search.
That sounds right.
I have about 14 years in digital marketing. I kind of forget the point at which I fell into PPC, but it was about 8, 9, 10 years ago.
Right when it was getting hot.
Very cool. You, Kayla?
I started at Hanapin in February of 2011, and that was my first foray into paid search. So it's been almost 3.5 years now. And it looks like actually the bulk of you are split pretty even between less than 1 year and up in Jeffrey's range of 5+ years. So 40% of you in each of those, and then we've got 20% at 1 to 3 years. So pretty even spread. Question number 2, how are you currently managing your accounts? Are you managing those yourself, part of a team that manages it internally? Do you outsource to an agency, or maybe it's one of those, but you're rethinking how that account is being managed currently? Jeff, you worked in-house prior to coming to Hanapin, is that right?
Yes, kind of. It's a very different situation.
Gotcha.
Where we're kind of a hybrid model where we take on their marketing departments for them. So half agency, half in-house.
Gotcha.
I was definitely interested to see this one as we were preparing the questions to talk over on it. If it was people who would be transitioning the accounts to newer account managers, and that was what people would be tuning in for, or if it was people who may be thinking of handing over to an agency or taking it in-house or something like that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think based on the poll results, about 60% of you said that you manage your accounts yourself. So I think it's probably potential outsourcing. And then the other 40% are actually rethinking how their account is being managed. So sounds like you were pretty right on target, Jeff.
I'm pretty smart.
Yeah, you've got your moments. All right, so we are going to move into the actual content of the presentation today. So what Jeff and I have prepared for you is a list of 10 questions that we think are pretty solid questions to ask your account managers. And then we're going to give you some tips and tricks on what to look for, types of responses you could or should expect to see. And then, like I said, we'll have some time for questions at the end. We know that there's a World Cup soccer game on, so we'll try to get through this quickly so you guys can get to that as well. All right, Jeff, I'll kick it to you.
So as I was preparing this, I kind of tried to make it broad across questions I would ask in interviews, because we do a lot of those around here. You might want to ask account managers you were thinking about hiring, as well as if you manage the accounts yourself. And how to hand them over, either because you had a promotion or maybe the workload became too much, you're starting to share it and everything like that. And as I was thinking about it, I thought one of the most common questions I ask people who are thinking about having a career in paid search is, how do you deal with frustration? I've actually seen the smoke come out of Kayla's ears before, quite literally. So it's something that happens, but it's a really important aspect of account management that people don't always think about. And that's because in PPC specifically, I think that there's not only every opportunity to fail, but it's pretty much a guarantee that at one point or another, something bad's going to happen. Sometimes it might be a mistake because there's millions of keywords and hundreds of thousands of ads and all those kinds of things that go with it. But a lot of times it's just because you're really smart, you thought about the right stuff, you put the right strategy in place, and then it didn't work. One of the most frustrating times I've had, I don't know if this is true for you, Kayla, is when we take over an account, for example, and the account's got terrible structure, nothing makes sense, search and displays grouped together, and so we think, oh, this is going to be a really easy win for us. We restructure it, and performance dips, and we have to figure out how to undo it.
You bet.
So even the smartest things can lead to frustration. So it's a really important question that I like to ask people, and there's 3 things I'm looking for. I'm looking for, is the account manager aware that frustration will happen. So one of the worst things that can happen is you say, okay, how do you deal with frustration? And they say, I don't get frustrated. That's actually a really bad sign.
Yeah.
It might sound like a great answer, but the reality is you're going to get frustrated, and if you're not aware of it, finally the time that it all builds up in you, you're going to explode. You're going to have a really hard time recovering. The next step is, do they actually know themselves well enough to know how they'll respond? So are they aware it will happen, and can they actually talk about instances about this happened to me, and this is how I processed it, this is my process for doing it, or do they kind of just wander around and say, I don't know, somehow I just managed to feel better at the end of the day? You're not looking for something that just happens, you're looking for some intentionality behind it, because the industry moves fast, accounts move fast. If someone gets frustrated and their timeline for recovering of it is just TBD based on however long it takes, things are probably going to go in a worse direction before you can actually course correct. And then the last thing is that there's actually a formal method for moving through it. Everyone handles it a little bit different, but what I'm looking for is here's my intentional way to recover from it. How I do it, it's kind of the Tiger Woods way, where if I hit a bad shot or if I make a mistake, I get really angry, throw my club, so to speak, throw my pen across the office, walk out, storm out, take a walk around the building, whatever it may be. But I kind of give myself up until the next thing I have to do. So Tiger Woods' thing was always he'd get frustrated and he'd give himself up until he stepped up to the ball again to be frustrated. And at that point, he needed to clear his head and hit the ball. For me, it's the next meeting I have, the next task I need to tackle, whatever it may be on my schedule. I give myself up until that to be frustrated and vent and complain and do whatever it is I need to do, but then move forward. So it's important when you're asking that question, someone actually has a process for it. Doesn't mean there's a right or wrong. Their process may be to write it out. Their process may be to just call a friend and vent. Their process may be they just need 10 minutes. And it may take longer. It may take a day or two to really get past something big. But the important part is they actually thought about it and do something intentionally. The next question I like to ask is, how much time do you spend on back? So back is, I think, an acronym we created here at Hanapin. So for people who don't know, it stands for bids, ads, and keywords. And a lot of people think that it comprises the bulk of PPC management. I'm either going to be changing bids, going to be writing and testing ads, I'm going to be finding keywords or adding negative keywords and those kinds of things. The problem is focusing on that kind of routine maintenance allows a lot of competitors to sneak up against you and do smarter things than you're doing. It also keeps you more focused on the activity, so you feel like you're getting things done and not actually doing bigger picture things that make the needle move. So I like to say, and what I like to push people to do, is spend 30% of their time actually on bids, ads, and keywords, and 70% of their time on creating strategy, figuring out how to expand the account, either in AdWords or into new engines like Bing and Facebook and Twitter and those kinds of things, or doing back-end data analysis. So all these leads we're sending you, are they actually turning into anything? Finding out that you have one keyword that doesn't drive a lot of traffic, but that every lead closes, and making sure you focus on how to double down on that keyword or keywords like it makes a much bigger impact than just going through SQRs and things that converted at one point and adding them into the account. So I'm really looking for people to spend a good chunk of their time on stuff that actually isn't activity-based. It isn't just bids, ads, and keywords, but is a bigger picture than that. So I think one way and one overlooked step in making a transition, either in-house to an agency or from one account manager to the next, is understanding these really 4 areas. The 4 areas are what your objectives are, the person who's handing over the account, what your objectives are, the pressures that you're facing, what blind spots you know you have, and then your personal work style. So objective is kind of obvious, right? Like it's going to be your CPL, it's going to be volume, or you guys in growth mode and just want more revenue or more leads, or you guys in cost savings mode, are you looking to drive down costs? Is there any specific products you're trying to get out into the market that you're not already advertising on? Whatever it may be, but it's really explain that. Most people get that step right. But the next one is the pressures. And this is what my boss and what my boss's boss want to see from me. And a lot of times it's not just performance. A lot of times it's want to know trends. We want to know what to expect a year from now. We want to know where we're making mistakes. We want to know, can we take money from other channels and put it into this channel? There's kind of questions that whoever's handing over the account gets on a daily basis that causes them stress and sleepless nights and everything like that. The next one is blind spots. So it's the information you know you don't know. For a lot of people I talk to, that's, I don't know what keywords are my best keywords. I don't know what leads actually turn into clients or sales for us on the back end. Maybe we don't really understand PPC at our agency and the value of it. And so we need someone not just to do the account work and do the strategy. We need someone to educate our team, executives and all, on what works and what doesn't work, and what opportunities exist within the channel and everything like that. And then the last one's work style. And this is really more for the person who's handing over the account. They're still going to be working with the new team who's working on it to get a lot less frustrated. So work style to me is understanding, okay, so me personally, I like things in stories. I don't like bullet lists of a million different things that could be done or should be done or need to be done. I like to understand the context. I like to understand what needs to be done in terms of the overall business goals. And I like to understand what the expected impact of those things are going to be. It takes a little longer to explain that stuff to me, but it helps me make really, really good decisions. So when someone just sends me a list of all the stuff that they see wrong or all the stuff that they want to do and all that, I get a little frustrated because I don't understand the greater context. But there's a whole other side of people who like things in lists. In fact, our CEO loves lists, and I've learned over time that that's how he wants information delivered to him. So that's fine. I make sure I deliver information to him in lists. He gets what he wants, and he delivers information to me in stories, and I get what we want. It works out really, really well. So understanding, one, taking time to reflect on what these things are for you, and then two, to explain them to the person who's going to be taking over the account. It's going to speed up your learning curve. It's going to make things go smoother, and it's going to make sure you actually get the results you want, not just the ones that the new account manager wants to get. And now I think we're going to move it over to Kayla and let her talk for a minute.
Jeff needs a drink of water probably. So Jeff definitely looked at his content and then the questions that he wanted to put into this from a lot of different perspectives. Of course, being in his role as president, it does come down to interviewing potential new account managers for our team, as well as handling issues for prospective new clients. And being in the sales department, I get a lot of questions that are geared towards our account management team, but I'm sort of asked to respond to them ahead of moving forward with a new client. And one of those is, how do you expand accounts? And I really think that the key to that question is, when you ask it, to look for them to start somewhere. So that's the hardest part, is saying something in terms of expanding an account, because it's never going to be exactly what you think when you finally get in to start managing. And separate from that, getting started is the hardest part, and that plan is going to flex. It's going to change dependent on the actual competitive marketplace this month versus next quarter. And generally speaking, that plan to expand is not going to be able to copy paste from one prospective new client to another. So just being able to start somewhere is certainly very important. Look for key target keywords like SQRs and competitor research. Those sorts of things are incredibly important when it comes to expanding client accounts, either internally or if you're moving over to an agency. So they should be consistently looking at what your competition is up to, looking at your search query reports to see if maybe your searchers are starting to look for you in a slightly different way. It can be really easy to get tunnel vision and not necessarily look at expanding your keyword set when you've been running the same account for a year, but there could be some gold mines in there. Make sure that when you're asking these questions about how the account could potentially be expanded, that you're also getting some pushback in terms of, well, this is going to be dependent on what budget you've got to allocate towards the channel and what vertical you're in. So you want to see that account manager is looking beyond maybe just Google and Bing, maybe beyond search and typical display. What outside engines are there that are available that make sense for this particular model? So Facebook is becoming much more popular on the B2C side because it can be somewhat easy to target prospective customers based on their interests and what they like and what they've purchased previously on that engine, whereas B2B may be a better space in terms of LinkedIn and moving into that expansion. So making sure that there's an even discussion over Google being separate engines within all of those platforms, whether there's search or display opportunity. And then finally, that there's some measurability to this expansion. So another thing that we come across quite often when we're speaking with potential new clients is that they want, keywords expanded by 30% in the next 30 days. And that may not necessarily give us the ability to say which keywords actually move the needle the most versus which ones are just sort of in there and spending budget. So really, targeting those expansions and making sure that you're measuring those things in very specific buckets so that you can come back and say, this is where there was success, this is where we needed to close things back down and reallocate that budget elsewhere, just to make sure that there's, like I said, a plan of action, period, and that plan can then be adjusted as necessary. Jeff, it wasn't a long break, but you got a couple minutes.
So some of the best questions I get are on when talking to prospects
Mhm.
or if someone's just picking my brain, is on if automation's important or not, or other questions that get to kind of the heart of my personal philosophy on how to manage accounts. And I think it's really important because there's generally no right answer. So do you think automation's important? It's a little bit of a loaded question, and there's no perfect way to answer it. But what you're trying to do is peel back a little bit into the way the person thinks and make sure that you're not just getting fed what you want to hear, or at least what they think you want to hear, but actually what they really think. So when you ask someone, do you think automation is important? Obviously, you may have a personal opinion on that. Yes, everything should be automated, and no, nothing should be automated, anywhere in between. What I'm really looking for when I ask that question is, do they say what they think I want to hear, or do they actually say what they think? So if we use a particular tool, is their answer all about that tool and how important it is and how it saved their life? Or is it more broad strokes about the importance of rules and reporting automation and all those kinds of things? I want to make sure they have their own brain, their own thoughts, and their own opinion. If they differ from mine, but I still want to hire the person, for example, we still may have a conversation about why they need to adopt my philosophy. But if it's someone I'm actually handing an account to, I want to make sure that they're going to be doing things they're excited about, that they care about, that they have experience in, because it's going to be much more successful than if they just tell me what I want to hear and they don't have experience in it, or understand how it's going to work. The next is I want to understand if they understand the tool landscape. So are they very one tool centric? Are they one trick pony? Do they only know one platform? Or can they actually speak to, well, here's when this type of bid rule works really well. Here's when an algorithmic tool works really well. Here's when Google's tools works well, and you don't need an add-on platform. Here's the best for reporting. Here's the best if you're looking to sync up lead quality to the actual search queries. Here's the best for linking sales quotas to your actual bid management platform. All those types of things. You want to make sure you actually understand it so that it's not just, hey, I'm really good at this one thing, I think it's important, but it's a little bit of, hey, it kind of depends on what you're trying to do. And different tools have different strengths. Some are more expensive, so you don't necessarily want an agency to be using them. Otherwise, your fees are going to be too high to hit the return on ad spend that you want. So it's understanding all that I'm looking for. And the last is give me recent examples of good and bad automation attempts, because it never works perfectly, just like everything else in paid search. So if someone tells me automation is really important and all they've ever seen is success with it, and all it's ever done is drive down cost per lead or drive up return on ad spend or something like that, I'm going to be a little skeptical because it doesn't always work perfectly. As well as if they say it never works, but they can't actually give me any examples of recent history of it working. The tools change so fast that what didn't work 6 months ago may be the best tool at your disposal now. And if you're not kind of constantly testing and checking to see what actually is going to work, you're just relying on a lot of bad assumptions or a lot of we call it dirty data here. You're relying on a lot of dirty data to make decisions that can have a pretty profound impact on an account.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you make a lot of good points about that, Jeff. I mean, it's the process that Hanapin went through to determine every time we have a determination of, well, what tools in terms of automation could work for our clients. It's always a very delicate balance of are we automating the right things that allow our team to work on those things that can't be automated, and that's really the key. Is if the account doesn't need a tremendous amount of automation, that's the answer. If it does need a lot of that, so that you can focus on completing keyword research and things that you don't necessarily want a machine just doing for you, that's really where the conversation should lie. So lots of really good points.
Absolutely, and it kind of leads into your point, your next point, which is a question of seasonality, because a lot of times people think automation is set it and forget it, but things like seasonality really change how you should be thinking about it and change the rules you have.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's the reason I think this question comes up a lot is, okay, if you're going to use some automation, how often are you going to come back and take a look at that? And it's one of my favorite conversations to explain to people that those automated rules are based on manual rules that are set up by an account manager. So that's something that certainly comes into play when you need to target for seasonality. No, I've never seen an account that trends or performs the exact same way January 1 through December 31. So there needs to be a different strategy for seasonality. So you need to ask your account manager how they handle those sort of trends, and a few things that they should come back and ask for. You're working with an account manager for the first, expect that they're going to request probably some year-over-year data or seasonality trends comes from you directly. This may be more on the back end, like Jeff was mentioning earlier, in terms of lead quality and where the spikes and the ebbs come from, your lead quality year over year and in that seasonality. They're also going to do, you would hope, some review and analysis just of PPC in terms of how that functions year over year within those specific seasons to see if there are trends in 2014 that they can compare to 2013, 2012, or if truly the seasonality changes every year and it's got a different cycle. Hopefully they'll also look at some of your other channels. So maybe PPC doesn't appear to have seasonality, but if your other channels do, there's potential for that seasonality to start pulling over into that paid channel. So looking at those other channels and making sure that you're learning where you can and applying it in PPC is super important. Then there's the looking ahead. So certainly it's somewhat simple to look at previous data and pick out cycles, trends, where you can see seasonal differences in performance. However, you also have to be prepared for what could be coming up that you don't know about yet. So looking at Google Trends to see if there are potentially unforeseen shifts that are coming to paid search that you can either see organically, you can see through the competitive marketplace. Sometimes it takes a new competitor a little bit of time to get some traction and some momentum. So looking into Google Trends to see if there's a way to be ahead of that seasonality or ahead of that competition is super important. Also make sure that if you've done all of this hard work and you've gone back to look at your data to be prepared for seasonality, prep those things ahead of time. So don't wait until 2 weeks before the holiday season if you're in e-commerce to start writing your ad copy. You know that that's a seasonally appropriate element that you need to be prepared for. You're going to have a lot of very specific ads that you're never going to be able to run again, at least not until this same time next year, because they're referring to the Christmas season or the Thanksgiving, Black Friday holidays. But you need to have those, and if you're prepared and you've looked at this analysis previous, you should be able to say 3 months ahead of time, all right, I've got 4 hours to pop out some ad copy that I'll be able to use coming up in November. So really taking the time to look at previous data, look at potentially what shifts are occurring, and then making sure that if you put all that time in, that you're preparing those things so that you're ready to go rather than lagging behind when the time comes. Crazy important.
And I think an interesting thing with seasonality that people who are handing over account don't always think. A lot of times when there is a transition, it's someone that ran the account for a year or two, and it wasn't really their core job function. They just wanted to see if it would work, and over time it moved up and to the right, and so they decide, hey, this seems to work, and then they hand it off. One of the things about new accounts is you don't really know the seasonality yet. So in newer accounts, it tends to be month-over-month performance. We're making gains, but at some point, that diminishing return happens, and you actually start to see this month did worse than last month, and this month didn't go up by as much as all the other months went up. And so it's not just having this conversation about the account, but about the business itself, so you kind of understand the real impact it's going to make.
Absolutely. All right, let's get you guys involved again. So our third poll question: what question do you think account managers are least prepared to answer? So certainly we're giving you a lot of bullets to be looking for in a particular question gun, if you will. But which question do you think maybe is skidded around the most? So if ROI isn't on goal, what's your plan to fix it? My goal is X. When can you hit that? If we need to expand this account, so this is something we've already talked about today, how would you do it? And how is PPC contributing to our company's bottom line? Speaking personally, I think that last one is the one that's maybe not prepared to be answered, but it's difficult to know necessarily. So it requires a lot of communication from the client to the account manager's side. So I think that's probably the one that appears that account managers are maybe least prepared to answer, but it's because they need more of a conversation in order to do so.
Yeah, and I think one that's not on here, so I don't skew the results, is the fact that so a question we get is, when is the point of diminishing returns? At what point is our budget maximized? Because of course demand is going to slow at some point, or it's going to level out at some point. And so adding $10,000 more a month to the budget is going to make you maybe bid up and spend more for the same clicks, or invest in a channel that's less effective than a previous channel. It's always a tough one to answer, and usually you have do a lot of analysis and get a lot of data to be able to do it, but that's one of the tougher questions.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like in terms of results from the audience, we're split 40% and 40% to questions 1 and 2. So I think that those are pretty fair and difficult to prepare for questions, especially if you don't necessarily know that they're coming. So the hope would be any super solid account manager that you select, whether it be in-house or through an agency, that they're actually posing that question to you and providing proactive ways to move towards whatever that goal or ROI needs to be. So great responses. All right, another thing that I come across quite often in our sales process is questions about what our quality assurance process looks like. And this happens typically when we're moving from an in-house management situation to the first I'm going to hire an agency conversation. And the reason being, you know as the client that you know your business very well, that you know what the ins and outs are in terms of what you can and can't say from an ad copy perspective. So you've got the ability to run QA internally and potentially do that in a shorter time frame. So handing those accounts over to someone who's possibly never managed in that vertical before, has more than likely never managed that account before, you want to know that there's going to be a process in place for making sure that anything that's implemented is at least given a 99% chance of being productive and performing as intended. So I love when I get that question because our team is built very specifically to make sure that those quality assurance processes happen. The first way to really minimize those kinds of errors is to ask your account manager about their previous training. So find out what kind of training process they went through. We're going to talk about this in a little bit more detail later as well. But how often are they going back to learn additional things and to find out ways to QA themselves and make their processes better. You can also have a best practices checklist. So I think of this in the way of uploading new ad copy in particular. So it can be a little easy to assume that you've changed out your destination URLs before you're going to upload a brand new ad copy. Make sure you write a checklist for that process to still, even if you've maybe not changed your destination URLs, go through and audit them just to be certain that they're not going to 404 as soon as you upload them because one small tilde got eliminated from the URL somehow in the Excel spreadsheet. So coming up with a checklist before any uploads, downloads, things like that is certainly going to help in that QA process. But then this leads me to the thing that, again, about Hanapin I think is truly important, which is that if you've got a multi-person check and balance system, it's much easier to keep those concerns and those errors from occurring. So at Hanapin, for the first 90 days for a new enterprise account, we have an associate director of paid search who's assigned to the account for that first 90 days. They're going to be on the weekly calls. They're going to be really taking part in all of those conversations from a strategy standpoint. But then they're also the ultimate person for the account manager, production specialists to push information up to for a final checkoff. Your account manager obviously is going to be putting together a lot of that information for you and putting it into the account itself. So allowing them to have production specialists, other account managers to go to, again, that director is incredibly helpful. Rostering on production specialists who maybe didn't help you get the project completed, but just to put a new set of eyes on a project to say, okay, I'm done as your account manager. Take a look at this production specialist and let me know if you find anything. Sometimes it's the 101 level stuff that's really easy to move over and to not QA on your own as the account manager because you've quote unquote been doing it so long. And then the final piece is certainly going to be the client side. So until we are as comfortable as we possibly can be with a client and what the ins and outs and the needs are of their ad copy, keywords, whatever the case may be, we're pushing ad copy through to that client to get the final check from them before we upload. Just again, as an extra, if you've got these 4 separate people looking at a project, it very, very drastically minimizes the opportunity for error or issue when you go to start uploading.
So there's a theme. So I had a beer in my avatar. Kayla's last one, I think, was beer.
Mm-hmm.
This certainly is beer. So we're in the Midwest, home of delicious IPAs and beer everywhere. Kayla doesn't drink it, so I always have to drink hers. But just somewhat transitions and mostly just makes me thirsty into the next question, which is when do you think quality score matters? So just as the beer glass and the type of beer glass you drink depends on the type of beer you have, because I'm fancy and sophisticated like that, I honestly believe that quality score matters some of the time and doesn't others. Google rolled out a new update on how they think about quality score and some, I guess, some transparency and insight into it. Just kind of ignores that because one, that was just recently done, and two, it didn't actually fundamentally change anything. And my last little point on this will explain why. But before I get into that, this is a correlation graph for a swath of accounts. They were all e-commerce accounts. They show the correlation between the quality score in the left-hand column there with CPA. So this was actually CPA centered, and you can see that it's pretty close. So what you want to see is all those little blue dots as close to the line as possible. You can see they all are in the right order. So a 7, quality score of 7 had a better CPA than a quality score of 6, and a 6 had a better CPA of 5, and all the way down it followed perfectly in order. You can also see I'm bad at taking screenshots because I managed to capture the plot area little signal in this as well, but we'll ignore that. So this is what you'd want to see in this case. We would say, yeah, quality score probably matters for these e-commerce accounts we were looking at. And this data is non-brand, by the way, if anyone's wondering why there's no 8, 9s, and 10s. This is all non-brand performance. And this was quality score for a bunch of education accounts. I think this was 10 education accounts we looked at. And you can see here there's pretty much 0 correlation. So a quality score of 7 actually had a worse CPL than a quality score of 6. Quality score of 5 worse than a quality score of 4. And nothing close at all to the correlation line. And so in this case, we said, well, quality score doesn't matter. We have some thoughts on that. One being that a lot of times it seems as if, and there's no official statement on this, the quality score for education companies is somewhat capped because of the competition and because of a lot of the vagueness of the terms that are used. So it seems to be the case. So maybe there's instances where Google says maybe we should worry about quality score less, maybe we shouldn't. But in the end, this shows you the difference between e-commerce and EDU. And if you looked at account by account, even within there, there'd be different trends. So the really important thing is if you want to know if quality score matters, you should actually open up the account, run an analysis, and see if it seems correlated in that specific instance. If it is, then yeah, you should absolutely focus on it. If it's not, then you should potentially focus on other metrics and not be so focused on it at all. So when I think about quality score and why I said I don't think Google's recent announcement really makes any difference, is I think of it as basically just a competitive benchmark for CTR, plus making sure you didn't do anything stupid that completely messed up your relevancy. Saying a completely irrelevant landing page, not having anything in that copy about whatever you're bidding on, or bidding on terms that are completely irrelevant. That's all it's telling you, is generally how you're doing compared to your competitors. If you have a quality score of 10, you can assume that whatever click-through rate you have for that keyword is probably pretty decent. If you have a quality score of 3, but everything else is relevant and looks good, chances are your competitors are actually writing better ads than you're writing, and therefore they're getting more out of that. So that's how I look at it. It's more directionally, do I have the right ad copy in place? Am I doing the right things in terms of actually trying to increase click-through rate and get the right traffic to my site? And if I feel like I am and the quality scores seem decent and I'm okay with my cost per click and I'm okay with everything else, then I don't worry about too much unless I find a really strong correlation.
Yeah, there's certainly something that to be said about relative CTR on the display network versus straight up quality score on search. That's actually the way that I think about quality score as well, is more of in the terms of relative CTR versus just straight up my quality scores need to be better. Lots of good points, Jeff. So we touched on just a little bit earlier in terms of asking an account manager, hey, listen, how are you going to expand my account? And if they're thinking beyond Google and Bing, odds are I've been referring to them as the sexy 3. And I say I'm referring to them as the sexy. I don't need that anybody else is doing that. But I've had, and that's fine. I'm okay with that. TM. Sexy 3 TM. So Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. These are the 3 channels that I've started hearing about in terms of paid search much more often in the last year or so when it comes to, okay, we've got Google and Bing and we're running those, and certainly they still need additional optimization and expansion, but we want to be on the social paid channels as well. So it comes up a lot, and it is always framed in the same way. Is expanding into Facebook, LinkedIn, and or Twitter actually worth it? So the bottom line is that they certainly can be. It comes down to a couple of different things. So first and foremost, I always want to talk about resources with these expansions. So these things do take a lot of time. Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter do not function as Google and Bing do, and that they're not necessarily going to be keyword based. Those platforms within those 3 social channels are not built. Bing's platform is very similar to Google's. You can even quite literally hit a button to just upload your campaign structure from Google into a Bing account. You're not going to have that flexibility when expanding into one of these three. So it's going to take some time and some personnel on board to be able to make that expansion happen. You're also going to need some additional budget. So one thing that can be a sticky part of this conversation is what we don't want to do is pull budget from Google and Bing, because odds are the reason you're looking at this expansion into the social channels is because you want exponential growth, not to make any dips in terms of where you're getting leads or sales from. So typically, if we're going to have a conversation about a Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter account, we're going to need to talk about budget. And if there is some budget that's not necessarily being used in the best way in Google and Bing, does it need to be reallocated into those engines, or could it be used into Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter? You're also going to need some very particular collateral. So whether it be image ad sizes, ads that are written in different character counts, you're, again, not going to be able to just copy paste some of your Google or Bing campaigns into these three engines and get running. Essentially what all of that rolls into is that this goes into the 20/80 rule, and that's backwards on purpose because it's pretty true with these engines. You get about 20% of your results, maybe, and it requires 80% of the work. So this kind of goes back to what Jeff mentioned earlier, is spending 30% of your time on bids, ads, and keywords, and the other 70% on strategy. You can't necessarily use that measurement on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, because with Facebook in particular, you need to swap out those ads once a week because people get overexposed to the images, and you have to switch them out so that they re-engage with your brand or with your advertising. So you have to put a lot of time into these, and you're never going to get out the volume from a Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter account what you get from Google, Bing, and even potentially some other different engines that aren't in these three that are just, quite frankly, more popular. So it ultimately comes down to, does this make sense for our brand? Are we going to get results? Could we get results? And if we will, what's it worth in terms of the time and the focus that these accounts would need? And where's that pull away from Google and Bing in the larger bucket of performance?
So speaking of performance, one of the questions that I don't think is asked frequently enough, even internally, even when you're managing the account and not turning it over, is how will you actually monitor performance? And it seems like it's easy. Like, I'm going to get a weekly report and a monthly report, and I'm going to get phone calls and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is it's more than that. We all know, so my favorite story is the Flappy Bird app that's the bane of my existence, that in one day, 3 or 4 accounts all on the display network all of a sudden started spending on the Flappy Bird app,
right,
and it didn't perform for them. If we weren't watching it that day and saying, hey, this campaign doesn't usually spend this much money and performance is usually better, it could have been a really, really painful experience for us really fast. So display network, it happens in particular when a placement picks you up. But even in search, we've had instances where a big news story broke. Sometimes that's been really good for a product we sold, like the Ray Lewis, what is it, deer antler?
Yeah, deer antler velvet. Bless you, Ray Lewis. We had a client. That
was fantastic.
Yeah, sold out an entire warehouse.
But there's plenty of other times where it doesn't work out, and a news story breaks, and there's just a lot of info seekers wanting to find research information and everything like that. So understanding how an account manager actually plans to stay on track, monitor performance consistently, not just at weekly intervals or monthly intervals, is really, really important. And what, to me, again, is the most important is that they have some kind of process, and they have some tools that they use. I don't know if there's a right way or a wrong way, but we use things like scripts that will tell us, hey, this account spent outside of standard deviation and spent significantly more or significantly less than it's normally going to spend. Maybe you should take a look at it. Somebody that just emails us, then we can look at that to determine if we need to do something. Rules in place that chop down really high bids or bump up for really low bids or really low average positions. So this isn't just normal rules. This is something that goes in the account that says no matter what, under any circumstance, there is no way I should ever have something in my account that goes above this level. So if other rules run that would cause it to keep going, stair-stepping up, or something like that, is in place just to chop off the top and chop off the bottom to make sure you're always kind of playing within the right bounds. Also, if it's going to an agency or something like that, you're going to want to know what the actual process is for account coverage when someone takes time off. So first, you've got to hope, and maybe a good question to ask is how much time do you take off? Account managers should take time off. you want them to not just stare at the computer all day, every day, 7 days a week. It's going to cause a lot of burnout, going to cause mistakes and everything like that. But of course, when they actually are taking time off, you want to make sure there's some process in place. They know who will cover the account, whoever will cover the account. It's not the very first time they'll ever have looked at the account. What their process is for actually downloading goals, what the process is for connecting the client or connecting the stakeholders within the company with that person before they go out of office, so it's not calling at midnight for the first time you ever talk to a person to find out something's going wrong, but you've actually talked before that. And then determining a process for when something is an anomaly versus a trend. So part of monitoring performance, if you do it frequently, if you're using all these tools, you may actually start to think, hey, we got to course correct here, but you're doing it on the wrong types of things. Maybe a bad day, maybe one bad keyword, maybe just something that's a complete anomaly. And if you're looking at the account too much and using too many tools, you may make decisions too fast, too rash, and send the account in a downward spiral. So there has to be some kind of process for, hey, if performance is above 10% of normal for 5 consecutive days, we think that that's probably a trend and we should look at it. If spend's high for this number of days, then there's probably a trend and we should look at it, or CPA, or whatever the metric is. Some sort of process for, here's how I tell the difference, so I don't do too much and I don't wait too long.
That's a really good point. That ties again back to the 30-70 split in bids, ads, keywords versus strategy, is that if you look at an increase in cost per click and your immediate response is to go do bid adjustments, you may actually just be managing to an anomaly, not necessarily something that's going to continue. Whereas if you allow that statistically significant data to collect, and then you make a more strategic decision in terms of how to manage the account moving forward based on a trend, then you focused in the right places. So it makes sense to me, Jeff. I just said that you made sense. That may be the last time that happens. All right. So again, I alluded to this earlier, but something that I think is really important to ask your account manager, and again, this is if you're hiring someone in-house, you're looking at potential agencies, or if you're in Jeff's seat and you're looking for new account managers to hire at your agency, is who trained you in paid search? Because it's a pretty important question, and paid search has been around long enough now that you've got a pretty wide spectrum of backgrounds and where people started. So Jeff, as he mentioned earlier, kind of fell into the paid search aspect of things from a general digital marketing position. I myself came directly into PPC only. So I got a lot of my initial training from the team here at Hanapin. What you really want to look and listen for is that they've got multiple sources of where they learned from. So not just saying, PPC Hero, certainly that's the number one that you should go to. But there are some other really fantastic PPC blogs out there. Obviously, PPC Hero has the direct quality of being all PPC all the time. And with some of those others, you've got to dig in to find where the PPC stuff is among all of the digital education. But you want to hear that they go to a couple of different places and then form their own sort of opinions and strategies and ways that they manage accounts from then. I think it's important to say I wasn't trained in PPC. I am training in PPC every day. So it's really easy for me to talk about how the actual account management team are the true rock stars, and they're the ones getting into our new client accounts and making changes. But I would be lying if I said that being in the sales department, I don't sit down with those account managers and they teach me something new every single day about how we can sell better, how we can explain what they do better. And a lot of that is, hey, Kayla, this thing changed in the industry and this is how you have to talk about it now. So you should never have an account manager that I trained from, rather they should say, I'm training from this source, that place, and this other person over here. Make sure that they're going back and looking at those 101 level things. So day parting is something that I think of, right, where it's a somewhat of a set it and forget it area of paid search. It's easy to look at when you're initially setting up those kinds of things, but how often do you think back to your initial day parting strategy and whether you need to make adjustments to how you do that today? So I consider day parting more of a 101 level optimization, but can you strategize around that differently in 2014 than you did in 2013, let's say? You want an account manager who's constantly looking at new tactics and strategies. So Google and Bing are pretty good about letting you know when they're making a change. What do they do on top of that? Again, this is another reason why PPC Hero truly is just one of the best places in the industry to get your information. What we love doing is taking a news update from Google and Bing and certainly regurgitating that to our audience so we can say, here's what it is, but then we explain how that means you need to go back and change your strategy around other tactics and other things as well. they should be able to tell you some lessons that they learned and mistakes that they made. So Jeff mentioned earlier that sometimes people don't want to answer the automation question. Very similarly, you say to someone, tell me about a time you missed a deadline, and it's so tempting to say, I don't miss deadlines. That's not true. Everyone's missed a deadline. I missed one just yesterday. Jeff probably misses them often. Kidding. Jeff's really great at it. But you need to be able to hear that you did make a mistake and that you maybe put a couple keywords into an account that you didn't think were going to match to a particular type, and it spent more money than it was anticipated to, and you figured out how to keep that from happening in the future. And really the big key to that is that if they're claiming perfection, or they claim that they don't continue to learn, that should be a tip off that there's maybe something under the top layer there that you need to dig into a bit further. I think that it's something it's truly special about the team here at Hanapin. We close down shop once a month to have something we call Red Bop, where it's just additional training for our team. So there's about 100 extra hours of continual training that occurs for each one of our account managers each year, beyond their initial training and anything that they've gotten previous to coming to Hanapin. So making sure that you're constantly pushing, learning new things, and keeping up with the industry is something you want to hear from your account manager. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you definitely want someone that's made some mistakes, because they're going to make them one way or another.
Right.
So they're going to make them on your account where they've already learned, and they're going to make them, they already made them on someone else's. And also it kind of goes back, a nice wrap up unintentionally, to the first thing of how they deal with frustration. So what kinds of mistakes they've made they've made in the past, and how they recovered from it is going to kind of tell you also in the future, when they make mistakes or bad things happen, how they're also going to recover from it then.
Look at that. We did bring that full circle.
Yeah, should have said on purpose.
Toast by accident. All right, so if you all are sitting in today and you're realizing you may need some help, clearly Hanapin would love to be able to be there to help. So we're opening up an additional poll here for you, and feel free to let us know if you're looking maybe for some PPC management. So actually having an agency team. I know a few of you mentioned that you're looking at potential other options. Having our actual team take over the day-to-day management of your account. Potentially interested in an audit, so where we really look at your account for potential optimizations and give those to you for you to implement. A retainer, where we can look at very specific needs within your account, sort of work alongside your team. And we've also got something called a free solutions blueprint, which is essentially an analysis and consultation on your account, provided you spend $20,000 or more a month, completely complimentary to you and your team, to determine what potential there may be to work with an agency. So it doesn't actually look like we got any questions. I have a feeling that that's probably because everyone is watching the soccer game on their second monitor, and that's completely okay. We will be posting the recording for this webinar on PPC Hero early next week. And if you guys think of any additional questions, feel free to reach out to Jeff and I. You can send emails to marketing@hanapinmarketing.com, and they'll get those questions over to us. You can send them to the Think PPC hashtag after the fact, or feel free to post your questions on the webinar recording itself, and we will respond to them there. I think that's it. Jeff, you have anything to add?
Nope. Thanks for carrying the load, Kayla.
Hey, I mean, I hit the right arrow button really efficiently. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next week.